Hello everyone, it's Shel C from PaperOcotilloStudio, and today I'm sharing with you a 6x6 canvas acrylic painting of a whimsical tree. This is part of a collaboration of people from the Creative Arts Collaboration on Facebook that is called #Paintingisfun, and we are encouraging everyone to try out painting because it is fun and it's also good for your health. So today I'm using tube acrylics from Arteza, and this one is mid yellow from the set. It's a set of 24, and I want a watery background to start out with. Now you have to keep in mind that acrylic paint will underbind if you put too much water in it. So if you're really concerned about your painting lasting forever and ever and ever, you should probably use glazing fluid to thin it out instead of water. But a little bit of water never hurt anyone, and I want this to really, the colors to blend and smush together, and I'm planning on putting a couple different layers of color. So I've also got some rose, which is a very translucent color, and some orange yellow from the set, and I'm adding those in along with some water. I have my water in a spray bottle, and then the paintbrushes that I like to use are actually acrylic handled ones, and the reason that I like them is because I'm a brush abuser and I tend to leave my brush sitting in water overnight sometimes because I forget to rinse them out. And if you do that, the paintbrushes that have a wooden painted handle, the wood swells and the paint peels off. So I'm really enjoying these acrylic handled ones that aren't damaged by the water soaking situation that my poor brushes sometimes get themselves into. This particular set of brushes is from Royal and Langnickel, and I will be sure to put links in the description box below of all the products that I've used and try to also let you know the colors I'm using as I go. So I'm still just mixing a lot of water and these particular colors and letting it drip and smoosh around, and I'm blotting up some of the water at the bottom as it drips down. Just trying to make an interesting watery effect. The rose colored paint, because it's so translucent, isn't really working out in this situation, and so I will add something different in a bit. Not sure exactly when. I am doing a voiceover on my video, but you will find at this collaboration when you go hop through the other videos that this was to be a real-time painting video, tutorial style, and that's not something that you see on my channel very often. I usually speed my videos and voice them over, so I'm not used to talking while I paint, and so I did a voiceover instead. So the next layer, after I've dried the last layer, I've added in some titanium white paint and mixing that in with the other colors just to give me some light and dark areas on my background. Dripping it down by loading up the brush and then kind of scraping it on the top edge. I'm doing it now with a little bit of the yellow and white mixed together, and then spraying it and letting it drip down. I like that effect for a background, the watery, drippy effect. So that's what I'm trying to go for. It seems hazy and dreamy to me, and I really just like it. I'm also adding in and filling in more painted areas where I think that the water has washed too much away, or it's dripped off the edge of the canvas on my first layer. Also not liking that rose colored area there on the right hand side at all, so I'll be fixing that up in a second. The rose paint is just really translucent, and has hardly any pigment in it in this particular set. I'm not sure if that's across the board rose paint or not, but didn't like it. Didn't like it at all in this particular situation. As you're painting, you can always change your mind. You can paint over things if you decide that the whole painting is just not something that you want to continue doing. You can always paint the whole thing over with gesso and start over. So this is neon pink paint from a different set. This isn't the Arteza, and it's also very translucent, but I like the effect of painting it on. I'm not going to add water to it. I just thought it warmed up the background a little bit where I put it. So I'm continuing with that, and also some of the yellow and titanium white mixed together. Starting to look a little bit like a tie-dye, I think, which is probably exactly what I was going for, although I didn't know it at the time. I don't have a reference for this painting. I'm just painting, you know, whatever I feel like painting, and that is very freeing to me, just to get it some type of a substrate out and just go for it. Paint what you want. It's a good therapy for you. So now I have this stencil from Stencil Girl. I will link it in the description box below. I can't remember what the name of it is, but it has these interesting kind of roads on it. They look like roads to me, like little dashed roads, and I want to put some of those in my background. So I'm using an artist sponge to apply the paint through the stencil. And I mixed titanium white and yellow ochre to start with, and I'm like squinching up the sponge and then just sponging only through the areas that I wanted that kind of a stripy road. And then I decided to get out a little bit more white and do it again, going in a different direction and adding an even lighter bit of texture on the background. This is just a fun thing to do, to add a little bit of movement and interest to your background. So I'm pretty happy with that. I end up using this little waffle weave part of the stencil as well, just in a few areas. I just like the way it looks. I like the way stenciling looks on a background. So now it's time to start thinking about a focal image for my painting. Decide to use a very fine liner brush, teeny tiny brush, teeny tiny, to just draw something. And my go-to happens to be trees. I just really like trees. I don't care if they're the cactus trees like I have where I live, or if they're pine trees, or if they're giant red sequoia trees. I just love trees, and so I decided to do a tree over my background. This is the Mars black paint, and I did put a little tiny bit of water in it to make it more fluid so that it would flow from my brush. I also dipped my brush into water and loosened up the bristles a little bit. So if you were too worried about just, freehand drawing with a liner brush right onto your canvas, you could certainly make a drawing with a graphite pencil or a pastel pencil first and then paint over the top of that. Or you could even trace something. You could use transfer paper. There's a lot of ways to get an image onto your canvas that are a lot less stressful than just randomly painting it with a paintbrush. Even though I am pretty experienced at drawing, this still is a little bit nerve-wracking for me, and I do make a little bit of a mistake, which I have to fix later by covering it up with another layer of paint. But like I said earlier, you can always cover it up. You can always change it. You can always go back even 10 years later and paint it differently the next time. It's not the end of the world if you make a mistake. And for your mental health, that's a good thing to remember. So I just have kind of a basic tree shape, and then I'm filling in the canopy. This is going to be a deciduous tree, some type of tree that loses its leaves. And I'm also making a root structure at the bottom here. I've already drawn in a hillside, which one thing that really bothers me about drawings and paintings is when things are not grounded. That just drives me crazy. So I always try to ground my things. And of course, a tree has to have roots, has to be grounded. So the roots go right into the ground. So then I'm making kind of leafy clumps up at the top. This is not a realistic tree. This is a whimsical tree. So it doesn't have to have each individual leaf drawn. It doesn't even have to have leaves stenciled, stippled in or anything like that. It's just a basic line drawing of some sort of a tree. And I think it's recognizable even though it doesn't have a lot of detail. I think you can tell what it's supposed to be, but you can see I have a few black lines that I need to erase. And I will do that right now. So I did give this a little bit of a dry and make sure that those black lines were dry. And then I've just got some leftover paint on my palette and I'm painting over the area of lines that I don't like. And of course they don't completely go away because the yellow paint is translucent and the Mars black paint is very, very opaque. So the yellow doesn't really want to cover up the black, and I end up putting a second coat of it over to just really get rid of that black line. I probably shouldn't have worried too much about it because I'm going to be putting more colors on the painting, but you know, it is what it is. So then I start to think about colors and shading for my focal image. I'm not just going to leave it a black line drawing, I'm going to paint it in. So I'm just giving a little bit of shadows right here with some of the leftover orange yellow paint on the palette. And that does end up kind of changing too, but it was fun when I did it. I'm using a small flat brush to do this. I tend to enjoy flat brushes more than rounded brushes, and I really like angle brushes, which is a flat brush cut at an angle. Those are my favorite, but because I didn't come into this painting with a plan or a drawing or anything like that, I'm just kind of experimenting as I go, which is what I like to do and what I recommend that everyone should do when they're painting. Unless that's not your personality, and then maybe you shouldn't, after all. Okay, now the real fun begins. I've put out some more colors of paint on my palette. My palette, by the way, is just an inexpensive white glass plate from Walmart. And I just let the paint build up on it, and then occasionally I peel that whole acrylic skin off. It's kind of fun to peel it off. Pick at it and peel it off is pretty fun. But I'm not concerned about all that dried paint because I just keep putting paint over the top of it. So this particular paint is crimson red, and I'm putting it as a shadow under my roots. And then I'm blending it out with a little bit of the orange yellow just to kind of fade it into a lighter color. And then I didn't really want to lose all my undercolors and patterns, and so I just come in with a baby wipe and kind of pat, 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 and it lifts up the color and lets it fade even more, and I can see some of that pattern underneath while still keeping my shadow there under the root. I kind of like that effect. Over there it got a little bit dark, so I lightened it up with some of the titanium white that's on my palette. And this is really giving dimension to those roots and making them stand out from the background by having that little bit of shadow underneath. And this is a dark tone, so it's also delineating the ground from the sky by putting it up there over by the hillside line that I have. It's a lot of fun. Right there, I really did not want to lose that waffle weave pattern, so I was being very, very careful and adding a little bit of extra water to try to make sure that I didn't cover up that interesting pattern right there on the hillside. Next, I've got pale green. I probably chose this one because maybe that's the color trees are supposed to be. Trees are supposed to be green, right? But not in my world. They're not always green. Sometimes they can be red and orange too, but you probably don't see a purple tree very often, although there are some kind of purplish ones. So I'm adding in this pale green, and I've blended it with a little bit of titanium white on this side, and then I'm also going to put some on the other side. When you're doing a painting, it's always a good idea to put the colors in more than one place So if you've put it in one spot, you might want to throw it in another spot. Just helps with balance. So I've put the green on both sides, and then I'm trying to retain that yellow-orange shadow on the bottom on this side, if I can. So I keep adding in and then blotting back. I also end up adding some of the mid-yellow to this side as well, just to make it more interesting. Just for fun. Don't really know where I'm going with this. I just know it's a tree. A colorful tree. So the next color, I've got that rose color out again, and I'm putting that in an area or two. Two, of course, because like I said, you need to bring your colors around to different areas of the painting. And I mix in a little bit of titanium white with it because it's just so translucent, that color. And I want it to stand out a little bit more. And then I add back in some of the orange at the bottom where I had the shadow to begin with, blending all those together. Or the yellow, orange, and the rose are close on the color wheel, so they will blend in with each other without making an ugly color. If you tried to blend the orange with, say, the green, not so pretty. That would make brown, so we don't want brown, although it is a tree, so hey, brown could have been okay. So the next color I bring in is violet, and it's way too dark. Way too dark. So I blot it up, and then I mix the violet with some of the titanium white to make a more lighter purple color, more of a mid-tone maybe, or maybe even a light tone purple. And I'm filling in that section of the tree that's in the back behind the other little puffy sections of the tree. And then I think to myself that I could add the violet to the trunk as well. But I do it in a very watery way. We'll get to that in a minute. Oh, there we go. Yeah. I add some here and there, and then I blend it out with water. It's so much easier to do a voiceover when your speed is 4 times fast. I'm finding that I don't have a lot to say at this speed. So here I am blending it out with water, just making it just barely there color to give the trunk a little bit of definition to make it separate from the background. It's really more like a purple shadow than anything else. This is a lot of fun. Purple is my favorite color, so I always have to have a little purple somewhere. Not always, but a lot of times. Still using the flat brush. It's a small one though. Doing a little blotting with my baby wipe. Acrylic paint does dry pretty quickly, especially in my climate. I live in the desert, but I did have to use my heat tool on some of these layers earlier. But normally I can just go from one section of the painting to another, and the section that I was working on will dry before I get back to it. So I'm adding back in some more of that rose. I decided that those areas were a little bit too light, and darkening up some areas of the purple. Violet, not purple, it's violet. Did you know that that's the color of the year this year? Pantone color of the year is violet. I think they made a good choice. So this last little section, I end up adding in quite a bit of orange and then coming back in with the crimson and darkening it up a little bit. Still really don't want to lose that pattern that I got from the stencil that's in the background, but I'm having trouble keeping it because these colors that I'm using right now are pretty opaque. So I'm trying to blot it back to keep the pattern showing. And I give all this a really good dry. And then it's time to, well, I guess here's where I'm coming in with the crimson to darken up the shadow under that little section. And realizing that the crimson isn't that much of a different color from the rose when it's at its full strength. But it is a little bit different. Blending with the orange. Still trying to keep some of that pattern underneath showing. Just touching up here and there. I'm about done with my color painting. And then I need to touch up my lines. As I've gone around painting the different sections of my whimsical tree, the paint has gone over some of my neat black lines that I had painted on. So I'm using that same teeny tiny liner brush and the Mars Black that's left on my palette to draw my lines back in. And I've speeded this up a little bit. So, you've already seen me draw it. Probably don't need to see me redraw it at regular speed. Seems redundant to me. So pretty much anything that you can do with a marker you can do with paint in a tiny brush, but you do have to practice your control of your hand. Just takes a little bit of practice. And then I decide to draw in some, paint in some doodling to finish off my design. Just doodle, doodle, doodle. This one is like a swirl pattern, spiral or swirl. I like them. I add in some hash marks. This is just basic hash, lines. Not sure why they're called hash marks, but they are. Little dots, big dots, that sort of stuff. This could also be done with a pen. I really enjoy the Posca paint pens, which are an acrylic paint that write beautifully over this. And if this was not a painting collaboration, I probably would have used the pens just because I feel I have a little bit more control. But here's some squiggly lines. Those are kind of inspired by the colors that were overlapping in that particular section. I kind of just drew along them. These are diamonds, or kind of a harlequin pattern, something that I like. Everybody has their own preferences on doodling and shapes and things that they are attracted to. I would say the majority really like circles, but there are definitely some other mark making shapes that people just continue to use over and over and over, and the diamond is one of mine. I like it. I like it in a harlequin pattern where there's diamonds lined up with each other. That's one of my favorite patterns or shapes or doodles or whatever you want to call it. I do a few little cubes over here or squares And I decided that my hash mark lines are too short, so I extended them out. They were kind of inspired by that stripy road pattern in the background. Over there is where that waffle pattern is, and I decide to outline it. A lot of times when you're doing doodling or this type of thing over the top of a painting, you can use what's there. There's some very beautiful art out there that has taken the shapes that are already existing in the colors and doodled around them and made, beautiful things that way. There's an artist that I like to watch her watercoloring videos named, her channel is Creations by Cece, and she does that a lot. She does watercolor splotches that seem like nothing, and then she doodles them and they turn into these beautiful flowers and things. I always enjoy that. And they're definitely inspired by the shapes that the colors created. Also, alcohol ink is a fun thing to play with in that same way, where you make some shapes with alcohol ink, which dries very quickly, and then what you see in the patterning of the alcohol ink can be doodled and you can create something out of it. Whatever your imagination shows you, that's what it's all about, your imagination. So right there was some varying colors of orange and yellow, and I put the little squiggly lines right along them. So then I'm switching to titanium white and the same little teeny tiny paintbrush, and I'm continuing my doodling with the white. I like the contrast of having black and white designs. I think it brings, it just gives a whole new dynamic to add in the same shapes or fill in some of the shapes with the white after you've done it with the black. I think it's really cool looking. So there I am, kind of filling in some of the shapes. Sometimes you can draw around the shapes that you've created with a different color. And it's fun. That one got a little bit splodgy, so I wiped it off and made it again. Here I'm filling in or drawing around some of the circles. I don't want to do every single one. I just want some variety of color and pattern that way. This is fun. I don't know if you guys have ever been one of those people that doodles constantly while you're on the phone. I do. I draw things constantly, just on scratch paper, whatever on the desk as I'm talking on the phone or as I'm doing something mindless. I will be constantly drawing, and this is kind of the same type of an exercise. It's just putting something somewhere because it seems like a good idea at the time, and that's all it is. And it's relaxing, it's good for your brain, and it's good for your hand-eye coordination. It's great stuff. I think everyone should do it. You can draw just lines, drawing parallel lines, or drawing a spiral that gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger is good for your hand-eye coordination. Some therapists have you do things like that when you've been injured or something like that. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, remember to give it a thumbs up, leave me a comment, subscribe if you haven't already, and if you don't want to miss a video, I make videos every other day, you can turn on the notification bell. Also, don't forget to go and visit everyone else's links that are below the video. Watch their painting videos and subscribe to them so we can all support each other here in a creative YouTube environment. And I think that the splatters are about the end of my video, so that's it for me. Here come your close-ups. Thanks. Bye-bye.